Alright, our next video is going to be on the midpoint formula and the distance formula. I feel like sometimes these two formulas tend to get overwhelming and they kind of scare you off, and they're really not that bad. Generally, where the mistakes happen are in the simple algebra. So our first four problems are actually not the midpoint formula yet, and not the distance formula. It's the Algebra 1 skills that you're going to need to make the midpoint formula and the distance formula successful. The first one, we have 1 minus 4 over 6 plus 9. Really easy. Don't go to your calculators right away. You do need your calculator, so if you don't have your calculator out, go ahead and push pause and go get your calculator. Or have your computer up and have Desmos open so that you can go ahead and make these calculations. I'm going to do this in my head by hand because I tend to actually make less mistakes when I'm not turning to my calculator. I have 1 minus 4. That's a negative 3. 6 plus 9. That's a positive 15. Oh, negative 3 over 15? That reduces down to negative 1/5. Done. But you know what happens if you rush to your calculator? If I do 1 minus 4 divided by 6 plus 9, yeah, I did exactly what I see, and I hit enter, and I hit math, frac, our favorite button. I get 28 over 3. A problem that we did so simple just now by hand, our calculator did wrong. No, we entered it into our calculator wrong. If you're going to enter these kind of fractions in, you have to do parentheses around the numerator, 1 minus 4, then divided by 6 plus 9, parentheses. You have to tell your calculator what all goes in the numerator on top, what all goes in the bottom, in the denominator. And then you see, oh, we math frac it again. There's the right answer. So don't rush to your calculator. Sometimes your calculator actually does more harm than good. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to push pause. And I want you to try number 2 all on your own. All right, how did you do? In the numerator, we had minus a negative 9. That means that we were adding 9. So negative 15 plus the positive 9, negative 6. Negative 4 plus 1, negative 3. A negative over a negative makes it a positive 2. All right, now the next one again. It looks scarier than it is. It's not that bad. But we go to our directions, round to the nearest tenth. So I look inside, I start doing my order of operations. PEMDAS. And I start with parentheses. Well, I've got some parentheses here. 2 minus 3, that's a negative 1. 1 plus 5, that's a positive 6 squared. First step done. Now I want exponents. A negative 1 squared. Remember, that's a negative 1 times a negative 1, which makes it a positive 1. You're always going to be squaring these numbers, so whether it's negative or positive, it's going to be positive because I'm squaring the negative, getting rid of it. 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is 36. Exponents done. I don't have multiplication or division, so I'm going to add those together to get the square root of 37. Again, not that bad, huh? We go to our calculator, the square root button. If you see right here where I'm hovering around, it's the square root right by the x, above the x squared, but it's in blue. So if I want to get to that, I have to hit second x squared. And that's where my square root comes from, 37. And we are going to round to the nearest tenth. So when I see that, 6.0, the 8 tells me that that's going to round to about 6.1. All right, just like the last one, I want you to push pause and I want you to try number 4 all on your own and then press play when you're ready to check your answer. All right, let's see. 7 minus negative, that means that we're adding 2 to get 9. 1 minus 10, that's a negative 9. 9 squared is 81, and negative 9 squared is also a positive 81. Plus together, we get 162. So if you get to 162, I'm good. If you're struggling with the 12.7, getting that into our calculator, I can help you with that. But right now, I want to make sure that you are getting to this point at that square root of 162. That means that you're doing all of your algebra correctly. So this is what we actually need to move on today's actual lesson. What are the coordinates of the midpoint of GH? All right, well, let's see. We have a segment GH, and we are looking for the midpoint M. G is at 6, -1. H is at 3, 9. I want to find the midpoint. Now, we have a nice fancy little formula, the midpoint formula. And the midpoint formula is you're just going to add the x's together, divide by 2. Because remember, the midpoint is the halfway point, exactly in the middle. It cuts it into 2 equal pieces. That's why we divide by 2. And then we add the y's together, and we divide those by 2. Now that's sub 1 and sub 2 just means add the first x and the second x. It doesn't matter which one you add first or subtract. So we are going to add our x's together. Our x's are the 4 first coordinates. Remember, ordered pairs are always x, y. So that's 6 plus 3 divided by 2. That's really 9 divided by 2, which is 4.5. That's the x coordinate of my midpoint. Then I'm going to add the y's. -1 plus 9, cut that in half. -1 and 9, well, that's 8. Half of 8 is 4. So here my midpoint is at 4.5, 4. Using that midpoint formula. See here how that's why we reviewed up here. We were just adding, where did my stuff go? 2 numbers together. That's all the midpoint formula is, adding the x's, adding the y's. Now number 2 is a little bit different. F is the midpoint of GH. So we have our segment GH. And F is the midpoint. So F is the halfway point. This is equal to this. F is cutting that segment into 2 equal pieces. F has the coordinates of -1, 3, and G has the coordinates of 2, 5. Now this is very different than number 1. In number 1, I was looking for the midpoint. When I'm looking for the midpoint, I use the midpoint formula. If I have the midpoint, and I'm looking for the endpoint, I'm going to use my jumps. Using the idea that midpoint is the halfway point. So I'm going from 2 to -1. That's how my x's are moving. And I asked myself, how do I get from 2 to -1? Am I adding? No, my number's getting smaller. So to go from 2 to -1, I'm actually subtracting 3. Well, if I subtract 3 from here to here, I also have to subtract 3 from here to here because it's the halfway point. I have equal distance on each side. So from a -1, I'm going to subtract 3, which puts me at a -4. Then I just do the same thing with my y's. I'm from 5 to 3. If I go from 5 to 3, I'm getting smaller again, so I'm subtracting 2. So then I'm going to subtract 2 again. 3 minus 2 puts me at a +1. So I'm using the idea that the midpoint is that halfway point, that I have the same movement on each side to find my end point to be at -4, 1. So if I'm looking for the midpoint like I was in number 1, I use the midpoint formula. If I'm given the midpoint and I'm trying to find the end point, I use my jumps like I did in number 2. And our last one, V has coordinates 2, 3. V is at 2, 3. And W is at 4, -3. Find the length of VW. So sometimes this can get a little confusing. If I ever ask for the length of a segment, I am telling you to use the distance formula. This is how you find the length of a segment. The distance formula is y2 minus y1 quantity squared plus x2 minus x1 quantity squared. So you're going to subtract the y's and then square it. And then you're going to subtract the x's and square it and add those two numbers together, which is exactly why we did this work right here. That was our distance formula, just with our numbers given to us. And it does not matter which one you say is y2 and which one you say is y1, or x2 and x1. What matters is that you're consistent. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract my y's. Here's my y's, and I'm going to go here to here. So -3 minus 3 quantity squared. So if I went from the right to the left, I've got to do the same thing with the x's. So 4 minus 2 quantity squared. Again, it doesn't matter which direction you travel as long as you travel the same direction for the x's and the y's. So we've got -3 minus 3, that's a -6 quantity squared. For our y's, 4 minus 2 is 2 quantity squared. -6 squared, remember we're squaring that negative, so it's going to become a positive 36. 2 squared is a positive 4. Square root of 40. We plug that into our calculator just in case we forgot. We have to hit the second x squared. We enter in that 40. When I look at this, it didn't tell me where to round, so we did the 10th before. Let's go ahead and do the 100th now. 0.32, so I'm going to the 2 spot. I looked at the number directly to the right, which is the 4. The 4 tells me it's going to stay the same and not round up. All right, that is midpoint formula and distance formula.